Okay, I've pressed the button, so it might be a minute or two.
I'll just wait a minute here. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the GA eConference. And I'm really delighted to welcome Paul Rose to give his public lecture online. He is a remarkable man at the front line of exploration and one of the world's most experienced divers, field scientist and polar expert. Paul was base commander at Rotherham Research Station for 10 years for the British Antarctic Survey and worked with NASA on Mount Erebus. He's so special that he even has a mountain in Antarctica named after him. Paul's exploits in the Northern Hemisphere include expeditions across the Greenland ice cap and scaling the north face of the highest mountain in the Arctic. He's also an accomplished diver, training US Navy divers, as well as being diving officer for the British Antarctic Survey. For his exploration and scientific endeavours, Paul has deservedly been awarded several accolades, including the RGS Founders Medal and the Queen's Polar Medal. With a passion for the environment and so many wonderful experiences to share, it's no surprise at all that Paul is really a media star. As a writer of books and articles, a broadcaster, and popular guest on numerous radio and television programmes, he's currently expedition leader for the National Geographic Pristine Seas expeditions. We're so very lucky that he's able to join us. He's currently in Switzerland, but has had recent expeditions to the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica and to Patagonia. So you've all got to keep a lookout on the National Geographic for his amazing films, especially Pristine Seas and the one on the Seychelles. I think Paul was a reluctant geographer, but in his late teens, I think he saw the light. He's now passionate about advocating for a sustainable planet, and I'm delighted that we can all enjoy his motivating zeal as he talks to us today about today's most important tool, geography. He's welcoming questions at the end of his presentation, so keep them coming and we'll get them here. So Paul, welcome, thank you, and over to you.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Jill. It's a great introduction, thank you. Yes, a reluctant geographer for sure, and I think that's why I'm such a fan of geography. It seems a crazy thing to say, but I am a genuine fan of geography. It's the thing that guides me through life. I'm now 68 and it's steadily guided me for most of those years. And it's all down to one single geography teacher. And I hope my inputs here will help us celebrate geography, help us understand and re-celebrate the need for geography. I feel that today we've never needed it any more than we do now. And also to remind ourselves that one single person really can make an enormous difference to the planet. And you can look at that two ways. You can imagine ourselves as professional geographers, and you've only got to look across the Atlantic and see what a difference that man has made to our planet. So here we go, a life of geography. And I'd like to start with, thanks very much, Jill, for your intro on the current work. And that is I'm the expedition leader for National Geographic Pristine Seas. Pristine Seas is a beautiful conservation project, and in many ways is a bit upside down to the classic conservation project. Some years ago, it would be all of us, all gathered somewhere, fall in love with a place, do some work, and then work out how to get it protected. And we'd be trying to influence politicians and everybody to make smart decisions. But with Pristine Seas, thanks to the genius Enric Sala, who started the project, we're a bit upside down where we do all of the political and scientific analysis first, and then look for good horses to back. So the idea is that what's one of the first things we can do with this overstressed ocean is to find explore and protect the last wild places, the last pristine places in the sea. So as you can see, we've had 30 expeditions, 21 marine reserves created, and we've established, and that is slightly out of date because we've moved pretty fast, a bit more than 6 million square kilometers protected. So that's what we do, and it's a short film on how we do it.
We are defined by the environments that we live in. When they say, where do you come? The first thing that comes to my mind is the reef, the forest, the corals. Maybe that's who I am.
The moment I set my eyes on these remote islands, I know why we're here.
This place is melting like a popsicle in Arizona in the summertime.
The big fish are gone. They have been fished out.
It only takes a few fishing boats and they can remove hundreds of years of biomass in just a very short period of time.
After 10 years as a professor, I realized that I was just writing the obituary of the ocean. I quit academia and assembled a team to do something about it. I want to show to the world what the ocean was like hundreds of years ago and why we have to preserve it. This is one of these rare places on Earth, a time machine, where we can see the ocean of the past.
What we do is hunt out the last pristine places in the ocean and protect them.
The ocean has amazing regenerative power. We just need to let it heal itself.
In one single pulse, in one immeasurably powerful heartbeat, the ocean has just changed my life.
So that gives you a little feel as to how we go about it. And I do wonder sometimes when we see these documentaries, I mean, these documentaries are edited in such a way, such a specific, focused way to encourage or support each host nation to protect a significant part of their EEZ. So that's why you don't see them on television much. They're mostly prepared for political influence, and they are slick, they are beautiful, but sometimes does it look a bit too easy? So this next very short video shows you that sometimes it's a bit harder to get something filmed than it first appears.
I'm Paul Rose, expedition leader for National Geographic Pristine Seas. And this is Aldabra, one of the wildest places on the planet. It's inhospitable. Come on, we need a tougher. I got it. You can't stay away from me. You'll be happy to know that the great man Neil is now a brilliant diver and a firm lover of sharks. I think it's worth looking back as to what is it that gets people excited about geography, and probably arguably more important, what is it that motivates people to take a certain career path? And for me, when I was 11, not very good in school, actually was in a race to the bottom, as we might call it these days. I had a bunch of Herbert mates. We were very pleased with ourselves. We were very good at sports and being out of school, and united in our dislike for teachers and anything to do with books. Me especially had a lot of trouble reading and a lot of trouble understanding what was happening in the classroom. But what I did know is that I had some heroes, and these heroes were
real characters. Here was Jacques Cousteau traveling around the world on Calypso with his team, really opening up the undersea life, the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. Who doesn't have all the books? And you can remember and hear that music right now, even as we speak. And this was an amazing thing to be there in a flat in Romford, watching a black and white television and seeing this occur. It was a truly different world. At around about the same time, they were replaying a lot of the Hans and Lottie Huss expeditions. It was the first time I'd seen people really working together. I had no idea that they were using the ex-military rebreather equipment, and who would have thought that those amazing shark images, which we now look back on, and they look quite grainy and simple, would be surpassed by the kind of underwater footage we're seeing today. But in those days, they were truly stunning. And of course, it's that great image, and I know you've seen it. I certainly saw it a million times. And as a 11-year-old boy, it was amazing to me. They were working on the bottom. Sometimes Hans, he was taking the images. You could see him moving the camera, and Lottie was sitting back with an underwater clipboard, recording what was going on. And it looked like a day of work underwater. And I absolutely loved it. Again, a long way from what I was experiencing, failing every exam in school and hating every minute of it and living in Romford. But then for me, it wasn't the real characters that inspired me. It was a fictional character. It was Mike Nelson in Sea Hunt. He was on most weeks having proper blokes underwater adventures. He was rescuing pilots from crashed jets and rescuing miners from flooded mines. And although I was a bit young, I did love the way that all the beautiful women in the world wanted Mike to teach them to dive. And I remember thinking, that's for me. I was going to be a diver, and I'd never had diving in the family. I had no idea how to become a diver. It was a bit like saying I'm going to fly to the moon. It was just literally impossible, but there was something about it that kept me going. At that time, there was 11 plus. I failed it inevitably, and naturally enough, I don't know if you could do it if we do it now, but there was something called the 13 plus where you could have another go. Inevitably, I failed that again, and with my new group of even worse Herbert mates in the secondary school, we were on a terribly fast run to the bottom. And that was until I was picked up by a geography teacher. And this man, Mr. Gray, recognized that we all were needing something. I think he felt we were at some turning point. What was really going to happen to us? I mean, we were 14 years old, not performing at all. So Mr. Gray took us to the Brecon Beacons, and I still remember the bus arriving at the school, and all of the kids that were doing well got in the bus, and me and my Herbert mates got in the special Bedford Dormobile with Mr. Gray, our geography teacher, and he took us to the Brecon Beacons. What was wonderful, as the further we got away from the school and the closer to the Brecon Beacons we became, he was out of his jacket and became this cagoule wearing, happy, motivated man. And he was brilliant. He was talking to us on the bus on the way up, and I realized that he was listening. He was interested in us. When we arrived, we stayed at the Merthyr Tydfil Youth Hostel first, and I had a natural affinity to it. I'd never done anything like it before in my life, but it turns out I loved it. I loved going up the hills. I loved being in the rivers. I loved camping. I loved finding my way. I had a good feel for a decent route up. I had a good feel for proper descent routes. And remarkably, I could do map and compass and navigation work. I had no idea I was doing mathematics or trigonometry, but I absolutely loved it. There was something about it. And I still remember that moment. There was one particularly foul day where most of the group were doing pretty bad and were complaining, wanted to go back, and, you know, lost in the fog and all this kind of stuff up high. And I was thriving in that adventure. And I still remember him praising me, coming up next to me, telling me how well I was doing. I was far too proud in those days to say anything back, as I remember, but it was the first time I do remember being praised by one of the teachers. And again, back at the youth hostel, peeling potatoes into a bucket in the rain, wet socks, that great sort of smell, and everyone doing their chores, as we used to call them in youth hostel, peeling that bucket, feeling never more alive, thinking I can do this. I got back to school, and that enthusiasm for being out there, and Mr. Gray's personal mentoring of all of us was the thing that kept me going. And it meant I could go on and pass something so that I could leave school. So you're dead right, Jill. I was a reluctant geographer, I suppose, but it was geography and one man in particular, one single geography teacher that saved me. And then I went on to live sort of geographical life. I know it's easy to say that. We can say everyone leads a geographical life, but I feel I really have. And my work has been based around this. It's been based around meeting scientists with a complex, ambitious, risky hypotheses. We know they're risky reputational wise, they're risky financially, they're risky for education. They can be complex because are these ideas going to work in the field? And I love that thought of taking that hypothesis, whether it's a bunch of equations or some rough ideas or a finely tuned field plan, and turning that into ships and aircraft and helicopters and, you know, airplanes to land on the ice and ski-equipped planes to land in fields. And I also love that moment. Here's one of my favorite field scientists here. You can see him in the middle of the screen, Jeff Severinghouse, when we landed on the Taylor Glacier for the first time in Antarctica. And I was so surprised that the first helicopter load had to have a stepladder with it. I mean, normally the first helicopter load, as you know, is food, fuel, shelter, and comms. But sure enough, we also had to find room for the stepladder, and that's so that he could get on top of this ladder, which is a known height, and then look at one of the team, you see him on the left of the screen in a red jacket, and work out the precise angle that would help us find the right place to begin our sampling work. While he's doing that, that's a moment for me, because we've done all of the hypothesis to practicality, and then we're in the field, and as you well know, you're all geographers and scientists of all kinds, there's that moment of pause, like, we're here, can we make this work? Well, while that's going on, it's been my job to set up camp, and there's our home. You can see the central tents, that's our mess tent, that's us where we all get together and eat and all the rest of it, and around there are the individual tents and the loot tent. You can see quite, you know, some years ago, we were already pretty good at this social distancing. And the next thing is setting up the laboratory tents. I love this kind of stuff because it's getting the power and all the instruments ready. And this particular project is all about extracting ancient methane, you know, sucking up old air from the ice. We do a similar job in Greenland, but a different technique. We don't drill for it there. Jeff discovered that the Greenland ice cap, as the snow forms into the different layers of ice, as it then runs towards the coast, it pretty much stays in its layers as it bends up against the nunataks and the mountains on the west coast. So the idea and the hypothesis was, could we start on the edge of the ice cap, move more central into the ice cap, and find the layer that was 11,000 years old? We would then mine that, as you can see, with chainsaws, and then the metal object on top of the wooden platform is a 1 million BTU melter, and we would put the ice in there, melt the whole lot, draw it down under a vacuum, extract the air, and then those air samples will go off in S6 cylinders, and the methane will be extracted to see what part methane played in past climate change. So you're mining for ancient methane, open cast on the ice cap of Greenland. And can you imagine, for me being a non-scientist, that's really heaven, because it was about probably, it must have been 30 years ago, I discovered that science teams need people like me. They need a science support industry, pilots and divers and climbers and boat drivers and bus drivers and electricians and plumbers and doctors and dentists and comms people, you name it. And approximately that number's still about 3 to 1. So that's when I entered the science support industry. For me, going from the plan, the risky hypothesis, to delivering it in the field, and now I am digging yet another hole in Greenland, is a wonderful thing. But as a lover of the sea, as you kindly said, Jill, for me, it's the ocean science that excites me. And this is the great man standing up there, Lloyd Peck, who many of you will know, in the water there at Rotherham on the Great Limpet project. And Lloyd's idea was that, his hypothesis was that we could learn a lot about past climate by looking at the thickness of limpet shells. Brilliant project, absolutely loved it. A very difficult physical project, because when we're diving in cold water, we like to dive deep because they tend to be shorter. You can have a lot of air in the suit, so you're a bit warmer. But these long, shallow dives are hard work. But we all stuck with it. And for many, many, many years, we collected thousands and thousands of limpets for the great man, Lloyd, to measure and tell that climate change story. You can't beat, though, all of those experiences. You can't beat ground truthing, because we go off and bring classically science data back. We're much better now, aren't we? We don't have science data lurking around and then reports suddenly arriving 16 years later to sit on a dusty shelf. We're in the business now of getting messages out very quickly. But we do have to accept that you can't beat ground truthing, says the man during the middle of the coronavirus lockdown, where no one can go anywhere. But when we can get out and ground truth, what a difference that makes. If it's me in the submarine here reporting from deep water, or if it's coming back with a film or images, or even better, getting the political leader in the sea to say, look, you feel that there's no shark fishing going on in your waters, but look at this, your beautiful Galapagos sharks are all swimming around with longline hooks in them. Or indeed getting them in the submarine so they can go deep, they can experience what their waters are like, they can fall in love with their marine life. And as we all know, says great, David Attenborough's quote, you can't protect it unless you love it. So this has been a great tool for us, is that ground truthing. Similarly, when we look at the transarctic shipping and the melting of the Arctic ice, these all become a bit sort of theoretical. We've all seen these things on the net and on the news, the possible shipping tracks, images of the ice breaking up, stories, the recent models that show that by 2040, there will be only a tiny little bit of multi-year ice, and that will be in the bit that's been coined last ice, Northwest Greenland, Northeastern Canada. That will become a little bit like the Serengeti, really. That's where the whales and the bears will be. But it becomes a bit theoretical. It's another bit of news that comes washing over us. So I relished that opportunity when I was working for BBC for the Oceans Project. We went a long way north on the Lancer, the Norwegian polar vessel, and just short of the North Pole, we found some perfect multi-year ice. And by diving within those caves that are formed in that incredibly thick multi-year ice, I can compare it to the thin ice, and then reporting on that on television goes a long way. You can't go wrong with these personal experiences. And I know from experience that while I'm talking on camera, while I'm diving under the ice there, I've got some of the television audience are going, wow, that's fantastic. I really understand that. The other half of the audience have got their hands over their eyes and go, oh my God, I would never do that. But at least they're listening to someone speaking about multi-year ice and hopefully getting an informed opinion. Similarly, when we're diving in conditions like this, if you're a diver, you look at that and you think that's awkward conditions because moving blocks of ice is not much holding it together. It's a risky old job, but that is the Northwest Passage. So if we're talking about Northwest Passage, which used to be the holy grail of expeditions, that was the journey to make, then if I'm up there diving within those conditions, it gives me a chance to tell the powerful stories. Ground truthing almost becomes a license to tell key and powerful stories. I've been excited about long, simple journeys. I'm often asked why I don't work much in the jungle, and it's because of pictures like this. I like the simple polar or ocean view, which tends to be relatively monochrome and not very many moving parts, which is why I like to do the Greenland ice cap crossing. I've done a number of these, similar Nansen, following Nansen's footsteps in many ways, east to west. It's 400 kilometers, takes a month, and it's a long, mindless, physical grunt. every day for 30 days, ski for 9 hours, put up your tent, do the same tomorrow. And these long, mindless physical grunts are perfect for me. I'm absolutely very good at them, and I love every minute of it. But there's also the value that normally when you ski across in May, it's cold and hard and crisp and rough as guts sastrugi to manage. But on my last trip, it looked just like this. You get near the other side and there's a 2-mile diameter puddle to contend with. And of course, you would never get that. You see that on the news or perhaps a science report or something on social media. But until you're there with your skis balling up with this deep slush and the sledge not moving and everything getting wet and horrible, then it comes to mind. So, you know, we have to accept during these difficult times, and we know things are going to change. There's going to be some opportunities, of course, but when things do change, we're still going to need the beauty of ground truthing to tell key stories. For me, working in the sea, you can't go wrong with being up close and personal to the marine life. This is me in the Seychelles a few years ago. Led an expedition in the outer islands focused around Aldabra. This was all part of the Seychelles government Debt for Nature swap. The Nature Conservancy and the Club of Paris organized a clever thing where Seychelles would protect 30% of its EEZ if a big part of its international debt was removed. And it's a smart thing. So our job was to go in and do the science on behalf of the Seychelles government. On almost one of the first dives, we bumped to these enormous grouper, and it was at the same site that Cousteau first went when they first pulled out of the Mediterranean. And grouper lived for a long time, and I often wonder, this big old boy, I just wonder if he was actually there to greet Cousteau the same way that he greeted me when I came down. But we do have to face it, when we're close to wild animals, the unexpected can happen.
You know what? There's so many moray eels down there that I've lost a bit of my ear to one.
We all like those pictures where you see us up close to moray eels and they pump the water through their gills, as you know, by opening and closing their mouths. And we've never dived in a place like that where the morays were so free swimming. This was Clipperton, and it was a constant battle of finding them inside your gear and in between the gear and you, and removing the equipment. But it's a great memory, and I have the scars to prove it. Similarly, on land, we've got to be respectful and careful and understand the risks of getting close to wild animals. You'll be, good, obviously that's not me underneath the bear, but I came very close to it one night on a beach in Canada, filming the Northwest Passage project and doing our science up there. One night, 2 in the morning, beautiful, calm evening, bright light, of course, a little bit of snow falling, gentle with no wind, acting like a simple white noise, beautiful evening. I had my sleeping bag completely unzipped. I was naked and just asleep, sort of more or less asleep. And then my world ended when I heard my breath and I was pushed down, and I woke up to a big woof, and a 900-pound polar bear jumped on me through the tent. He'd obviously smelt me and done the great classic jumping on, but all of his sharp bits missed me, wrecked the tent. So I sat up, the snow was coming in very quietly in these enormous holes, moved to the front of the tent, wondering what was going to happen next. Obviously I couldn't see him, and I did a pretty good job actually of slowing down my heart rate. It was at maximum, and by the way, if you're looking for a test to see how your ticker's doing, you can't go wrong with having a bear jump on you, because your heart goes from full rest to full maximum immediately. Slowed down my heart rate and went to the front of the tent. I just had my little V25 tent, opened up the inner
and very slowly opened up the fly. And in doing so, discovered these two enormous brown eyes staring at me with his nose pressed on the tent. So we stared at each other for nothing longer than probably 15 seconds, but it felt a long time. He then walked off. As he walked off, I hustled and got my down jacket and started to get myself organized. I didn't feel confident enough to fire a flare or a gun at him because being so close, I wasn't quite sure what might happen. So he went, as I put my jacket on, he heard me and ran at the tent. As he ran at the tent, I figured, well, I'm finished. But he stopped at the tent and walked around it for 45 minutes and then went off onto the sea ice. So that was the end of my sort of what I call polar bear attack. I ended up with just a stiff neck and a funny shoulder. I've got the tent repaired, and it's quite a good memory to lay in that tent and see the repairs. And we kept it pretty low key because we were trying to do science and film up there. We didn't want to make a big splash of it. So I was highly amused when we were nearly done, and the dog that we brought in to help protect us from the bears was so excited when we were diving close to the camp. And he loved me because I knew where the food was. I loved him because he was a beautiful dog. That when I came up on the last dive of the expedition, he was so excited to see me again that you can see right there, he managed to hang on to me and bite me through the hood and bite me firmly in the head. So although I don't have any polar bear scars, I certainly do have some in my head right here. It's just a love bite from the world's most beautiful dog. So we tried to keep all this relatively quiet. So it was amusing to come home and find myself on the front page of some national press, as depicted by the great cartoonist Shelbourne. So yes, we do have to be a little bit careful about how we go about getting close to wildlife. And I'm reflecting this year on how great things were. There was a moment where the IPBES report came out, and you'll all remember that. It was another high point in understanding global conservation issues, and all the headlines around the world carried the fact that, you know, we're going to lose another 1 million species, and here we go, and the wonderful analysis with E.O. Wilson and Half Earth, and are we already at Half Earth? What should we do? And you just have to love these stories. And in every media outlet you can imagine, smart activities on social media, and really sort of a celebratory sense for all of us working in conservation that we're really getting somewhere. I mean, if we're in these cold or difficult, challenging places, then the thought that we're really getting somewhere makes it all worthwhile. And now we're all part of this Campaign for Nature. I'm sure you are too, which is this international agreement to protect 30% by 2030. I very much like it. It's a milestone, 30 by 30, because we do want to protect 50% by 2050, E.O. Wilson, Half Earth. And on the way to doing those things and all of these great activities, and you'll have seen, as we all have, all of the press on the way, we count, I certainly personally count, on these waypoints, or sort of lighthouses on the way, and they are our international conferences. For the ocean, it's our ocean. This is where global leaders have almost been queuing up each year to make their ocean protection announcements. You know, COP26 was due this year, the Congress on Biological Diversity, China this year, and all of these important UN moments, the High Seas Treaty, for instance. And I take those as waypoints, as a way of measuring success and how good this has come out. We're here, it's been announced. I was at Davos, for instance, this year, and you're there and you feel like practically something's happening. And these wonderful agreements that are made publicly, and of course the equally wonderful agreements and important progress that is made in corridors. So it feels like progress. And I just wonder what's going to happen, because we've missed so many of these key waypoints, these key paths on the way, these international conferences. How missed are they? What's going to replace them? And what are we going to feel like when we get back to them? I'm hoping they're all going to feel different. Maybe a lot less talk and a lot more action. So I have a question. I know you have questions for me, but I just have this, you know, what is our vision for the new normal? as professional geographers? What are we expecting and what are we hoping and how are we going to help make it happen? One thing for sure that's going to happen is we're not only all become expert overnight Zoom experts, is we're going to be experts at working remotely. And it seems great. We're all doing a lot more of it. That's certainly going to change and influence a lot. We're used to it at sea. This is one of my expeditions here, the Azores expedition. We talked to, in fact, I did one only 2 hours ago, the Nat Geo Explore classroom, to a few thousand people all around the world, mostly parents and children at home. Normally we're speaking to classrooms globally. It's a great project, and sometimes we're reaching hundreds of thousands of young ones for 45 minutes. That's what it looks like to them. They've all got questions for us. That's what it looked like to us. It's my iPhone duct taped onto a tripod and various members of our teams and scientists coming out and answering questions. So we're all going to be very good at this remote work. I'm delighted to see that we, Geographical Association, have got a new project, Geography at Home. Of course, the great man Hugh with Anturus at Home project, which is launched pretty soon. I'm very happy to report I'm one of his team now to do some of these online sessions. The RGS, as we know, have got Geography at Home, and it's been a huge success. I'm part of that. And I had news today that that includes the Monday night lectures. My one is the 18th of May. National Geographic has been the National Geographic Education group are a tremendous group, and they've made good use of this time. Why not look upon it as an opportunity? So the whole of the National Geographic archives and new projects and new learning tools are all now completely free, called Nat Geo at Home. And I do encourage you to have a look at that one. It's a great resource. And as I said, I'm doing them as well through a great organization called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, which is run by Joe Grabowski, who runs National Geographic Explorer Classroom. So that's how we're going. I think we are going to make some changes. And to work out where we're going to be, we need to understand the way our relationship with nature has been through our lifetimes. Unbelievably, this is the kind of thing that our forefathers would have laughed at. What do you mean you need to establish a different relationship with nature? But of course we do. And then how do we influence values? Well, you would think that as professional geographers, we would have a key message that we can do there on, how do we influence values? And I'm hoping that anybody that is hoping to stand for a political position, or the chief executive of a big company, or board members, would have a different section on their voting. So instead of voting for what party they were or how much money they've got, we need to display proper public global community values. I would love to see the day when we're trying to vote online and a big red flashing light comes up and says, danger, danger, danger. The person you're voting for has never done any humanitarian work, has never done any conservation work, has never attended a GA annual conference. So be aware. I think we need to reset our values, and I'm hoping we can be a force to reckon with on resetting those values. So for me, I'm locked up as much as you are. I'm here in Geneva, Switzerland, and I'm dreaming of those long tracks across Greenland. I can't help myself but know what it's like to be in my tent in Greenland, that wonderful sense of space and rhythm and simplicity and monochrome life. I'm even dreaming of really cold places like my camp just short of the South Pole some years ago, and high camps on Denali, Mount McKinley, camps for climbing. I remember putting this up on Mount Washington one winter. And even this camp, you wouldn't want to be there forever, but that's one of my old camps in Greenland. And there's a sense of thinking, wow, it was rough and it was an exciting adventure and near-death experience, but we've been cooped up for a while. We want to be out there doing things, even if it means losing your tent in various exciting places. But for me, it's that simplicity of being out on the clear, simple, polar territory. And this place, it's the Taylor Glacier. And that's where my dreams are right now. And I've got one thing to do, and I've always wanted to do this. Mr. Gray was the teacher that turned my life around, and no doubt
many others. I never did get to thank Mr. Gray. I was too proud to do so and just wanted to escape school. So I've got this little bottle of champagne, a glass. While you're preparing yourself to ask me questions, I'm going to pour myself a glass of very good champagne and raise a toast to Mr. Gray and, of course, to all geography teachers and professional geographers worldwide. So thank you very much indeed. And I now invite your questions, comments, or indeed advice.
Thank you, Paul, so very much. Good old Mr. Gray, what a man he was.
Cheers to Mr. Gray and all geographers.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you, Paul. There are some questions.
Oh, good.
We got a question from Catherine Owen, who has done very well. She was awarded a GA award earlier this afternoon, so that's fantastic news for Catherine. She says, I'm lucky to and work in a school that values fieldwork. Not all schools do. What do you suggest teachers say to heads who don't want students going out of school? A minority of my students are terribly cynical about environmental issues. How can we tackle this? So that's
a really great question, because you'll notice I've taken my green screen down and I'm now sitting in my equipment room with Mr. Gray's champagne. And you see I've got my penny farthing behind me and a bunch of essential equipment to life just there. Yes, well, I think the best thing to do, if someone has their mind made up that they will not get people out on fieldwork, then it's a bit like the ground truthing message I was explaining there. Because if they won't, we could bring in, I could come in and talk to them. You can bring in all kinds of statistics and data, and they'll never get it. The way to do it, if it's entirely possible, is to get that head and other influence out on a piece of fieldwork, so they can experience themselves the difference. They need to see little Paul Rose at 14, an absolute disaster, coming back 10 days later from the Brecon Beacons, a changed boy. They need to see the successes that we all know, all those wonderful successes that we experienced when we're with our, younger generations, older generations, anybody, when we're out with these people and they make that change and you see that switch go in their minds, that your head needs to experience that personally for the difference to really click.
So what about your cynical students who really are not bothered about environmental issues? So you've got the head out on his field trip and you've converted him. What about those? What about people like you? And I think perhaps if it's the Paul Rose in 2020, he's probably harder to convert. He's got his phone, he's got his Twitter and his social media account and all that kind of stuff. He's very sophisticated. How do you get through to the real hard-nosed cynics?
Yeah, well, of course, there's always, the temptation to go into threats and intimidation, but it never works. At the other end of the scale, it's working out who they are influenced by. And it could be they're influenced by football players, or musicians, or singers, or dancers, or others.
Yeah.
Find those people, or if you can't get Ronaldo to come to Birmingham to go on a field trip to drill holes in some rock somewhere, then you at least get a football individual or team to run a football field camp. And then once they've done a football field camp, they realise that going out of the school building on a school trip is actually a good thing. So it might be dancing. And we all know that it would be impossible to get a famous dancer to come, but you could get someone to say, we're going to do a dancing trip. So rather than make the leap from school to not enjoying teachers very much, to then suddenly doing a geography field trip, then do the stepping stone thing, and one becomes dancing, another is soccer, and another one is, could be art, and a piece of art, and not then art and then suddenly geography, but let it stand alone. So that kid comes back to school, as you say, with all the other distractions, but going, wow, I had a brilliant blooming field trip. And what did you do? Well, we went to Leeds United Soccer Club, and they hosted us for the afternoon, you know? So I think some stepping stones on the way, using whatever voices they are already listening to.
Brilliant. Okay, now here's a technical question. This is my question now. Which part of the ocean is under the greatest threat?
Ah, that's a great one, Nat. Thank you, Jill. Well, at the moment, there was a time when we used to think of the ocean as separate seas and oceans and all that, but now, of course, we think about it as one body of water. So what happens is that we've got so much better science data and big data and artificial intelligence and all the rest. We know that one bit of the ocean that is threatened affects the whole ocean. So that is the thing. So when we look at, say, plastic entering through Asian rivers into the Coral Triangle or into the northern part of the Indian Ocean, we know that when you and I are up in the Arctic, we're going to see that plastic on the beaches. Mm-hmm. And those beaches that used to be pristine, and in fact, we all know Arctic summer beaches are strange things to be around. It's hard to find out where the land ends and the water begins because the ice is breaking up and all the rest of it. Well, now those Arctic beaches are sandy or rocky beaches and they're full of plastic because it used to be held out by the ice edge, you see, and now that's melted. So yes, and it's the same thing with overfishing. If we just this whole complete ecosystem, it's like an aircraft, everything's got to be in it for it to fly. And if we start removing predators, if we start polluting certain elements of it, it's the whole ocean that is affected.
Okay, so that
pollution and climate change.
Okay, so that depressing answer that the whole of the ocean is under threat leads me to the next question. What do you say to some of our students who are so scared about climate change or what climate change is doing to our planet, they talk of not having children of their own?
Well, yes, I've heard this, but I think, and I would advise that life goes on, and our life is still a celebratory, beautiful, adventurous experience. And if they have young ones, and those young ones understand the planet and the way the planet works, understand nature, have a sense of science and geography, they're going to be part of the solution. They're going to be part of the ones that make it different. And we all know that the planet will be different in the future, but there's a chance that we really can protect 30% of it, and on the strength of that, protect 50% of it. And as we know, that's all going to make a big difference towards climate change. And when we protect large bits of the world, and couple that with all the smart ideas that are coming up technologically, which are brilliant. I mean, I can't remember how many days it was in the last 12 months, but the UK was getting more power from non-fossil fuel. Mm-hmm. And when we look at some of the smart thinking that might come from this coronavirus events, where we start to finally lose some of these awful unsustainable subsidies on certain fuels and illegal fishing, then we're going to see some big changes. So I would say have those young ones because they're going to be celebrating. It's not all a gloomy picture.
Yeah, it's amazing, the coronavirus. I mean, it's a desperate tragedy. But actually, I've seen photographs of India Gate in Delhi, and when we were there, you couldn't see India Gate. It was just, in a fog. And today it's bright blue skies, the air's cleared, so the earth is responding. And there are people in Delhi who can see the Himalayas. So it's been a wonderful example of how the earth can bounce back. I mean, nature is extraordinary. Exactly. So there is some hope.
We've seen this bouncing back, and we've seen, our pollution for what it is. And we've also exposed our global leaders for what they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And decision-making on certain businesses. So I think we're at the beginning. I think this is a very optimistic launch pad for the future.
Okay, so here's a really good question, and it flows perfectly. How do you think young people can make the most difference to the world and help make the future brighter? What can they do right away?
Excellent. Well, the big thing is a brilliant question. So obviously, whoever's written the question is well informed. It's good. But I always say to people, be informed. And I do it because I forget the correct terminology, but there's a terminology about always reinforcing your own news pattern, which is quite dangerous, you know, because you keep reading all the conservation stuff, and then you don't read all the rest. So I do force myself to read. I read the stuff from Trump, you know, I read the stuff from Bolsonaro, and I force myself to read this stuff to try and develop and maintain a sort of rounded, informed thing. So I think keep doing that, keep doing the informed opinion stuff and reading everything. Have an idea as to where you see us in the future. And one way of doing that is think of what can I do right now, as you rightly say. And there are some things we can do instantly. We can 3 times a day, we can begin to change the world by not eating so much meat. You know, I love to eat meat. I had a great beef lunch today at lunch. But if we all eat a lot less meat and a lot more plant-based food, we're going to instantly make quite a big difference. You've only got to look at those numbers on deforestation. I mean, we lose 27 football fields every minute of primary forest for agriculture or monoculture like palm oil. So it's us, it's our appetite that drives that. And then, of course, I would say, look at your sphere of influence, and whatever sphere of influence you have, work in that sphere of influence to be a motivator. So you may have just seen this session, have some opinions about it, and take those opinions into your group, whether it's a school group or a neighborhood group or a group that meet every once in a while to toast Mr. Gray with a glass of champagne, whichever group that is, and work within your network to help generate those smart opinions. You'll be surprised how working your own network and sphere of influence makes such a difference.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I think that's it, actually. But Paul, thank you so much for, I mean, the powerful images were wonderful, opening up new worlds to us. And actually, there's hope for all of our pupils to become converted. I mean, it's amazing how geography can just trip the switch and motivate young people, just as it's done you. I mean, exactly. you've made us smile, but we do wonder how many escapades you've survived and how you've managed it. But it's wonderful that all your work has borne fruit, and that bit by bit the world is being protected. And it's been a privilege to meet with someone who's really making a difference. So thank you for being such an inspiration. You've made us feel that studying geography is really worthwhile. So I've only got one thing to say, and here's to Mr. Gray.
Oh, yes, here's to Mr. Gray.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Everybody here and all geographers. Cheers. Good luck.
Cheers.
See you.